Hey YouTube, how you guys doing? My name is Kyle, you know me as Dragonmar, and welcome to a new video. Today we'll be discussing Gamesense, going over what it is and how to improve it. Now this is one of the most asked questions I get on Discord, during my streams on Twitch, and here on YouTube in the comments, and honestly it's a question that really deserves its own video because of how complex the answer can get and sort of, how complex the person asking the question wants the answer to be. So here it is. But before we get started, remember I do stream every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch, as well as Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Tuesdays are dedicated just to viewer VOD reviews. I know you guys love those on YouTube, so if you want to see some VODs reviewed live on Twitch Tuesday, see you there. And remember, those can always be submitted in my Discord with the links down below. What is Gamesense? That's a great question. So the way I like to describe it, and this may not be exactly how every single person describes it, but I think it does a really good job of illustrating what can be a somewhat of a complex topic depending on who you ask. But I like to describe Gamesense as everything relating to the game, so in this case Valorant, that's not mechanical. That's not related specifically to your mechanical abilities, your aim, how you move your mouse, things like that, right? So when you take your aim away and you play the game using all of your other senses, whatever senses you're using for your game, that is Gamesense, in my opinion. Now, one of the great things about Gamesense is that it can even be carried over from other similar games. Games like CSGO and Overwatch, for example, are great games on their own, but also share some big similarities with Valorant. And because of that, a lot of the players from there, I don't know if you guys noticed this, a lot of the pros from there came over to Valorant and just sort of took it with ease. And now they're pros here as well. That's because they carried over not just that aim, but also the game sense from those games. Things like understanding how to develop game sense even quicker, through a certain methodology or whatever it may be. If you guys have watched a player by the name of Hiko, streams on Twitch, plays for 100 Thieves, he is extremely good at Valorant, and he was since day one. Part of this is because of the thousands and thousands of hours he put into Counter-Strike as a professional player, and he took the game with complete ease. I had the pleasure of playing many games with him as well. He's insane. But the thing with these pros, is they came in with all this experience. So what about you guys? What about the guys who are coming in for the first time? Well, that's why I'm making this video, because I want to explain exactly what Gamesense is and how to get better at it. So if you're still confused, here are some examples. Knowing exactly how much time is left in a round without needing to constantly check the clock. That's a great example of Gamesense. It's understanding timings. Realizing in an agent selection that having a third duelist probably not the best choice for your team. That's also Gamesense, right? That's understanding team comps and sort of how to play as a team. But understanding where to plant the bomb so that your teammates can easily defend it post-plant, also Gamesense. That's knowing maps. That's understanding line of sights and understanding how to defend. Knowing every smoke lineup and how to play around them, also Gamesense. Knowing, for example, that there is damage fall off on certain weapons, and you need to stand a certain distance with a Phantom to get a one-shot headshot. That's Gamesense. And remember, that's Gamesense, but shooting the gun is not. That's not Gamesense, that's aiming. Realizing that with only 10 seconds left in a match, with an enemy nowhere near a bomb site, and it just being a 1v1, so they need to kill you, right? Well, what are you going to do? You're going to hide, of course. That's Gamesense. Gamesense is strategies, it's timing, map knowledge, economy management, teamwork, pre-round setups, rotations, etc. Gamesense is broad, just by definition of what it is, but it's incredibly important, and there are some ways to actively improve it, and that's exactly what I'm going to be going over. A lot of the times we can dismiss how to improve your game sense, sort of that question, by saying a sarcastic answer like, just play the game. But in all honesty, that probably is the best case. You do have to play the game to develop game sense, but there are some other workarounds. Now, what I want to say is that game sense should be developed mostly by playing competitive. There is no doubt about that. The best practice is to get yourself into those competitive games with the right mindset. But remember, mindset is important. So keeping that in mind, here are some tips for improving your game sense. Tip number 1 is to self-reflect after every single death and round loss. This means that there should never be a second in a game where you lose a round and you don't actively think about a few things. First, how did I die? You need to figure out exactly what killed you, from where, what was it, what weapon, was it a player, was it an ability, how did you die? Second, why did you die? Figure out if you were out of position, out aimed, maybe you got flanked, maybe a teammate did something you weren't expecting. You want to know exactly why you died and how you died and from what. And then finally, what can you do to change the outcome the next time? Or in this case, what could you do that time? And then you apply it to the future. Your job here is to not just figure out how and why you died, but what you can actually do to change that moving forward. What can you do with this new knowledge? Okay, so maybe you peeked a little bit too far out this round, you got opt. Well, what happens if you peek a little closer next round? Is that going to be a solution? Should you jump peek? Should you not peek at all? That's what you need to be thinking about after every single death. You want to self-reflect. You want to look back on how to improve your play. There is a reason why people charge money for VOD reviews and why pro teams have analysts who specifically look back at their gameplay to help them reflect and get better. You need to constantly be looking back on your positioning, your timing, your ability usage, your econ management. All of that stuff is core and crucial to improving your game sense. And if you are not actively looking at every single round as a way to improve, you are actually hurting yourself. You need to improve your game sense by actively reflecting on your actual gameplay. I mean, there is no other way to look at it. You have to be able to be critical of yourself. And if you're not capable of that, I'm sorry, but you're not going to get very far. Tip number 2 is to watch the pros. Now, I'm not joking about this, and this is one of those situations where for this type of thing in particular, for something like Gamesense, watching the pros is actually really useful because they're pros for a reason. So what you really want to watch is not necessarily their individual streams, but the tournaments themselves, because this is going to give you a better understanding of sort of how the game can be played at the highest level. Now, you're not there, you're not at that level, obviously, but what it does allow you to do is to see how they play around certain situations that you might find yourself in. Now, when you're watching these games, there's a few things you're going to want to pay attention to. First is positioning. Where are these players at all times, in relation to the enemy, to their own team? How much time is left in the game? Where are they during that time period? In the beginning, in the mid, and the end of the round? When time starts running out, how do they move? How about when an enemy uses an ability? How do they play around it? What are their positions when certain areas get smoked off? That is game sense. Second, ability usage, like I was saying. How and when do they use their abilities? Are they using them all at the start of the round? Are they using every single molly they have, every grenade, every smoke to start the round off, and then 15 seconds later they have nothing? Are they holding on to it? When are they using it? And also, what situations in particular are they waiting for before using their abilities? That is key, by the way. Third, economy management, right? What set of conditions do they buy weapons and armor under? When are they buying abilities? What sort of weapons are they actually buying? Like on a save round, are they buying bulldogs on third round? Like, what are they buying and when? What prompts them to force buy? How many rounds are they losing by for them to feel the need to force? Are they winning and forcing? You want to figure these things out, but you also want to make sort of a conscious effort to try to decipher why. The why is so important in Gamesense because you need to know why certain things happen, not just they happen. You know what I mean? Fourth, strategies. Now, I know for a lot of us who solo queue, strats are kind of out the window, but sometimes these strats can be just solo dependent. So one person can do it all kind of. So do they have set executes? How are they executing onto these sites? Do they play defaults? Do they play like one person in each lane, waiting, holding, seeing if there's going to be pushes? How do they stop flanks? Are they using Cypher tripwires, Killjoy, turrets? What are they doing to prevent these flanks? All of that is incredibly important to understand. Even if you can't exactly replicate it in your game, you might come across it. And then fifth is clutches. In particular, how are they playing with everything on the line? It's really important when you watch these games that you're thinking about, okay, in this situation, what would I do? And then watch what they do, because you want to compare it. You want to say, okay, this is a pro player. How are they approaching this situation? Now, don't be Mr. Hindsight 2020, seeing everything in the end. Don't do that. You want to think ahead of time. Okay, they're in a 1v1. This is how I play it, and then watch how it plays out, okay? All of these things, like I said before, It's kind of like self-reflection, but in this case, you're just reflecting upon what you're watching instead of what you actually played yourself. This is incredibly important, and this is for those people who really want to take their gameplay to the next level. Maybe they're, plat, diamond, or even immortal, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I think I have something, or I just want to get really good. You're going to want to watch the pros because you want to understand sort of what the meta is, if you will, and sort of maybe how you can bring that into your ranked games to help your team. What sort of strats and ideas and sort of things of that nature can you take to the table that maybe you didn't have before? That is exactly what developing your game sense is all about. It's all about learning new things and using that in your games. Now, the third and final tip I want to leave you guys with is something that I say a lot to people because I don't think enough people understand this, and that is to study the maps. You want to know these maps inside and out. Guys, please, there are only 4 maps. There is no reason you should ever be surprised by where an enemy is playing, or ever be surprised by an execute on a site with certain smokes or certain walls or whatever it may be. You should never feel lost. You know what I'm saying? A huge part of developing game sense comes from having this incredibly deep understanding of the foundations of each map, how they play, how to exploit certain features of them, and why. It's really important that you understand all the little, cool things about them. Things like one-way smokes, maybe specific mollies, how to play a certain angle, more efficiently, where you can sort of hide from the bomb, for example, post-plant locations, things like that. This only comes, guys, with understanding these maps, and of course, nothing will compare to actually playing the game in competitive and playing on these maps, but that doesn't mean you can't be proactive. Doesn't mean you can walk yourself through them, or early on in your development, understand exactly where things are going to be, where players play. You can hop into some unrated, into some deathmatch, check certain things out, see what you can see from what range, how you can play around certain positions. Remember, when you're studying these maps, you want to be looking at a few things, right? First of all, executes. How do you execute onto a site? How can you take a site? What corner do you have to check first, second, third, fourth? Where can enemies sort of hide safely from you when you're doing that? And how can you expose yourself to the fewest angles possible? Second, flanks. Huge one, especially for a map like Haven. How do you expose yourself to the fewest amount of possible flanks? Do you have a cipher? Can they use their tripwires? Can you use cameras? Can you use a killjoy turret? How can you stop people from flanking? Or the vice versa, right? How can you flank? How can you get behind the enemy team without them knowing? What sort of timings are you looking for, right? Third, right, is common positions. Now, this is a big one for me because I stress crosshair placement so much in my videos. Now, I'm obviously game sense, not really related to aiming. However, you want to know exactly where players can play and how often they play there. In my head, I think I sort of have like a rough percentage thought, right, of how often a certain enemy is going to be in a certain spot. When I check a corner, I'm like, okay, there's about a 40% chance someone is here. And if they're not there, I know exactly where to look next because I think they're going to be there. That's what you need to do. You need to know exactly where enemies play. Now, the best way, obviously, for that, you have to play competitive games to see where they play, or watch the pros. And then finally, ability lineups and ability usage on these maps. How can you use your abilities to your advantage? This is not a game with just aiming. Valorant has abilities, and you have to understand how to use them. That is a huge part of game sense that a lot of people are still developing. I think CSGO players have less of a good handle on ability usage, while players from Overwatch, for example, have a better handling on ability usage just because of how those games end up playing, right? And this is really important. This tip to study the maps, to understand them, because map knowledge is not just like knowing the lanes and the layout. It's knowing all of these other extremely important things that I've mentioned in previous tips and in explaining what game sense is, and it's pulling it all together on each map. You go into each map with like this library of knowledge in your brain because you've studied them. You understand exactly what can happen and when. You have the timings down. You have the rotations down. You know exactly what to look for in what situations. That is what I want for you guys. I want you to know these maps inside and out so you never are getting caught off guard. That is when your game sense is going to start shining. That's when people are going to be like, wow, this is a very smart player, because it shows. It really, really shows. And in conclusion, just to sum everything up and just say one final statement, if you're just skipping the conclusion, I want you to hear this. The best way to develop game sense is to play the game. There really isn't a way around that. Watching the pros is going to get you sort of to that next level, but you have to have the foundation there to begin with. You have to play the game in competitive, and you have to play it quite a bit. There really aren't shortcuts. A lot of what I just mentioned in these tips is sort of like really putting the extra effort in, because a lot of what game sense is comes naturally. That's why it's such a hard thing to answer, because I could be like, oh, just play the game forehead, and be pretty correct in sort of what I'm saying. However, I think there is more to it, right? I talked about self-reflection. That's something I emphasize a lot. It's all about being critical of yourself, and because you want to fix your mistakes. And when you fix those mistakes, guess what? You stop making them in the future. Now, guess what? If you're not making mistakes, you're playing better. You're playing better because you understand the game better. You understand the game better because you're increasing your game sense. Watching the pros, for example, it's not just about reflecting on yourself, it's about reflecting on others, right? You're reflecting on your teammates, or in this case, you're reflecting on the pros, and you're going to compare yourself to them. You're going to say, okay, if they do this, how would I do that? Or if I do this, what do they do instead? This is how I play this position. How does a pro play this position? That's why I love watching them, because I'm at a level roughly where I do play with them, and so I can see them firsthand, and then I can watch them in a tournament. And I'm like, okay, how are these guys playing against the highest level of competition? It helps me tremendously. And then finally, I talked about studying maps. Studying maps is really important because, first of all, damn, that's a lot of dedication. But second of all, so much of what GameSense is derived from certain maps, because every map plays differently. Remember, no two maps are the exact same. And because of that, certain abilities, certain tactics, executes, defaults are going to work differently. So it's really important to understand each individual map as its own sort of being, rather than just sort of all of them together, like this is how I'm going to play every map. Your playstyle should change depending on the maps, and that is a huge part of developing your game sense. With that being said, though, guys, remember, nothing is ever going to replace playing the game in competitive, in rated, in ranked, whatever you want to call it. You have to play in order to increase your game sense. But I hope some of these tips made sense. I hope my explanations made sense. This is a topic I love talking about, and I could talk all day about it because I think it's so cool and it's so interesting to talk about different ways to improve it and sort of what makes certain players so good, like Hiko. But I think we'll stop there and we'll say thank you very much for watching. And of course, guys, if you made it this far and you're still with me, I really hope you leave a like on the video and also subscribe. It does mean a lot to me. I'd love to hear in the comments your takes on GameSense, you know, what you feel has helped you the most, where you feel you're at right now, and maybe what you can do in the future to improve. But with that being said, I hope you guys did enjoy, and I'll catch you guys later. Take it easy and peace.